Hello, everyone. We're here for a very special edition of the BAMF podcast. My name is Jason Tondro, and I'm filling in for host for our redoubtable Mike Lafferty. But Mike is wisely staying right away from this tonight because this is all my stupid idea. This is the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and we're celebrating with the Star Trek, the new film. What is it called, Jim?
Star Trek Beyond.
Beyond, that's right. Star Trek.
No semicolon, so no pause.
That's right. Star Trek Beyond. All right. So the rest of the world is celebrating with Star Trek Beyond. But while we're in the middle of this sort of anniversary celebration, I was reading some blogs and reviews and podcasts and stuff, and I came across a review of Star Trek VI on Entertainment Weekly, and I pointed the most knowledgeable Star Trek person I know at it, and that's my good friend Jim Seals. Jim, say hey.
Hello.
Jim, introduce yourself a little bit. Like you wrote a little bit for a Star Trek website, and you've written fan fiction in the Star Trek universe. And
I actually wrote a piece on Star Trek VI for Trek FM, which was a podcast sort of network of Star Trek, different shows and whatnot that hasn't been publishing in the last year or so. I think they're upgrading to a different site. And I took a look at the more problematic issues with that film.
With Star Trek VI.
With Star Trek VI, which we'll get to in this to
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I wrote a couple short stories. One for the Pocket Books' Strange New Worlds anthology, which was not accepted, unfortunately, and one for my own coping with Leonard Nimoy's death, because that sort of hit home, and I find the best way to handle issues is through prose fiction.
Yeah, make good art, right? I mean, that's what it tells us. Make good art.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman, yes.
So
you invited me to talk Trek, and
yes.
I just want you to know what you're getting into. I have my Spock T-shirt on, my Captain Kirk heel.
Nice. How do I know it's a Spock T-shirt? I can't see it. What does it say?
Oh, it's the different emotions and Spock's face.
Gotcha. Bored Spock, tired Spock. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Sean. And because I only got to use this really when we were doing the Star Trek role-playing game that I ran a couple episodes of, which is the Star Trek Encyclopedia.
Yeah. So when I asked if you kind of wanted to, if you had any thoughts on Star Trek, or specifically Star Trek VI, because that's what this particular review is on. And you suggested that, why don't we, I suggested, well, why don't we do like a podcast on it? Because I've been trying to get you on the podcast forever. And you suggested that we couple up the films rather than trying to talk about all 12 of them one at a time, that maybe we group them up by twos. There is 12 of them, is that right?
Yes, those 12.
Okay. So we would
count, depends how you count the A1 movies and whatnot, okay. But those 12.
With the Abrams, which now has a new name, by the way.
The Kelvinverse, or the Kelvin timeline.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I saw that this morning.
Well, anyway, so your other suggestion was that we pick Final Frontier, number 5, because each of these films is kind of a response to the previous one. That there's always a lot of influence from the previous film on the current film. Mm-hmm. So, and this seems fair because...
Whoa! Give me a sec.
Sure. Common wisdom about Star Trek is that the odd ones always suck and the even ones are always good. So we figured that we would talk about Star Trek V and Star Trek VI. And then we'll also maybe talk a little bit about the recent decisions by CBS/Paramount to set up official guidelines for fan films in the kind of aftermath of the Axanar lawsuit. Well, so anyway, so that's kind of our topic for tonight. And forgive us if we're going to go long, because I know Jim, and he's going to have a lot to say about these movies. And I'm a fan, but I'm not like as as knowledgeable in Star Trek as he is. So my job tonight is to sort of ask the dumb questions. And if I miss some dumb questions or some of them are too dumb, now don't hesitate to correct me or help us out. We're going to pick two other, if this is successful, if this goes okay, we're going to pick two other films to talk about next time. So if anybody has any suggestions, feel free to tell us, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, so this all started because of the review of Star Trek VI, and it's common wisdom that Star Trek VI is kind of one of the best of the Star Trek films. This is Undiscovered Country with Christopher Plummer as General Chang.
As the Shakespeare-loving General Chang.
That's right, and this film has a bunch of very famous Star Trek quotes, like the whole business about how you can't really appreciate Shakespeare until you've read him in the original Klingon.
Yeah.
And a bunch of other, like the whole, in many ways, kind of quoting things as one of the running gags of the movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
It starts off at the very beginning with only Nixon, with Spock saying, there's an old Vulcan proverb that only Nixon can go to China. And it just kind of keeps going all the way through to the end of the movie. But anyway, so common wisdom is this is one of the best of the films. Franish's review that we read on Entertainment Weekly suggested that the first half of the movie is outstanding. And then it kind of becomes a franchise movie and starts trying to hit all of its plot beats that every franchise movie, every Star Trek movie has to hit. And when that happens, it kind of loses all of the things that make it really cool. It's still good, but the best part of the movie is the first half, by kind of ending with the trial of...
Well, I think a lot of it is lost in the different cuts of the movie that are out there.
So tell me about this, because I had no idea until you just said this. There were multiple cuts.
Yes. So typically when they release, at least back when Star Trek was going out, they would put these movies on television. That would be how you watch it. You'd watch it with commercials. They would have to pad out the runtime to either 2 hours or sometimes 3 hours. Like it'd be the motion picture would run for 3 hours on a Saturday night, and that would be the weekly TV movie.
Yeah, I remember. Those of us that are old remember the days before online streaming.
Yeah, I know, right? So what they would do is they would look at what they had in terms of footage and see what they can put into it.
Yeah.
Now with Star Trek VI in particular, like we'll talk about this at Rathacon, because
yeah, this is a big issue.
Has a lot of wonderful scenes that just aren't in there, and so the emotional beats don't ring true with the theatrical cut.
But with VI, there was a whole subplot that's excised from the movie. Really?
Yes. Can you tell me which famous Star Trek actor made his debut in Star Trek VI, watching this movie?
Made his debut? Well, yeah. I know that there's the Christian Slater cameo.
There's the Christian Slater cameo, yes, but like who goes on to become a rather famous character in the universe?
I don't know. I mean, okay. Michael Dorn's in it.
Michael Dorn is in it, and he's doing Worf's grandfather.
Yeah.
But Rene Auberjonois, who plays Odo from Deep Space Nine, is also in the film.
Is he?
You saw him as the Klingon who tried to shoot the president.
Oh, okay. All right.
But in the extended cut that was released on one of the the initial DVD release.
Yes.
And the home video release.
Yes.
There was a whole subplot where Starfleet Command has a meeting in the president's office to decide what they're going to do with Captain Cook being taken prisoner. So it's before the trial happens, and it's after he's been arrested. And there was a meeting with the president and Sarika Vulcan, I believe, is there.
Yeah, there's a scene of this in the film.
Yes, but this scene specifically has Rene Auberjonois, not as a Klingon, going over the detailed invasion plan. So he's going over the invasion plan of we can go in and rescue them with minimal casualties. And his character is named Colonel West, which is an allusion to Colonel North from the Iran-Contra affair.
Oh, Oliver North.
Later in the film, he disguises himself as a Klingon to
Oh.
make it seem that the Klingons had killed the president, and thus we have the big, like, that whole subplot is removed.
So when I watched that film, I thought, oh, the Klingons are shooting the president, but it's actually a human in disguise as a Klingon.
Because when Scotty shoots him and he flies out the window and he crash lands, the reason he doesn't incinerate is because Worf has his other line, which he runs up to the body, inspects the blood, and it's human blood. He goes, "This is not Klingon blood because it's not pink."
Right, Pepto.
That's also a little contribution to this film is he suddenly shows up at Kittimel because he has to be there.
So and you feel like these missing scenes really change the pace of the film?
I feel like it changes the tone and some of the conversation of the film. The other sequence that that gets changed in it was the mind meld sequence.
Oh yeah,
which is still difficult to watch.
Yeah, it's probably the most intense part of the film.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. But there was a couple like quick cuts and edits to other things to sort of show the breadth of the conspiracy. Because the conspiracy kind of gets, once they name General Chang, it just sort of becomes General Chang's show, and ownership of it doesn't really spread around.
Yeah. And
so these quick edits and quick cuts to other characters sort of help show, okay, Chang isn't just the face man. He's just he's just the Captain Cook of this plot.
The other, I mean, the thing that I remember when I first watched this film, and you mentioned it a little bit when we were talking before the show, that it's incredibly obvious who the traitor is because there's only one new cast member.
Yeah.
But as everyone who's read, even a novice like me knows, this is originally supposed to be Saavik, not what was her name? Kim Cattrall's Valeris, not Valeris. And if it had been Saavik, it would have been a whole another level of intensity, because I mean, it would really have brought the whole 6-film sequence full circle, because Saavik is of course introduced in the very first scene in Wrath of Khan, right?
Yeah.
And so in the second film, and then she sort of drops out, and she has a small parts in 4, and she's important in 3, of course. But
boy, is she important!
Yeah. I don't want to undervalue Saavik's role, but my point is that she, and in fact that would be important, right? I mean, she has this huge relationship with Spock, and then for her to be the traitor would have carried just a tremendous amount of emotional weight.
Mm-hmm. And I would think that there would need to be a sequel after that, just to deal with the ramifications of it.
Yeah, almost. I mean,
like at least there would have. So I was watching the movie today.
Good, yeah. So was
this discussion.
Yeah,
and watching Valeris is just it was painfully obvious to me when I was a kid watching this movie the first time. 25 years ago when this movie aired in '91.
Yeah.
That one of these is not like the other.
Yeah, right.
So I'm going to watch this one.
Yeah. Even though the film makes a bunch of very conscious attempts to establish her as not the traitor, right?
They really do. They go out of the way. What is missing is Valeris' motivation.
Right, which would make perfect sense if it was Saavik.
Yes. Because
Saavik was victimized by the Klingons as an infant.
Yes, and then you go, you play off of that, and you play off
it would make perfect sense if it's Saavik. Yeah.
She had, you could introduce that she had some sort of appreciation of David and watched him be modeled in front of her, like that changed her worldview after Star Trek 3. Much the same way, and then she's not just a mirror reflection of Spock; she's a mirror reflection of Kirk, right?
Right.
Because that's the problem. That's the disconnect. Because Kirk is the driving force of the film.
So let's talk about Kirk and the race politics of the film.
Oh.
Right? I mean, I know this is the big problem, I think, for a lot of people. Now,
it's my big problem.
Yeah. And, you know, the thing is, like, Kirk's whole argument, like how I've never trusted Klingons, and that doesn't hold any water in the original series. Like he like, I remember Day of the Dove, right?
Yeah.
Like
he teamed up with Kang.
So walk us through Day of the Dove. Like, yeah.
So with the Day of the Dove episode, the Enterprise, as is the wont, encounters, especially in the original series, they encounter an energy life form. The original series loves two things. Three things. Monster of the week.
Yeah.
So you got your Holders, your Gorns, your salt vampires.
Yeah.
Gods that aren't gods, which we'll get to in a little bit, with Star Trek V, and energy creatures of some ilk. Sometimes these three are all connected, as in the case of the Excaliburians in the episode with President Lincoln.
Okay, sure.
All three of them molded into one.
Yeah.
With Day of the Dove, they encounter this thing that feeds off of hate and anger and violence. And essentially, events get manipulated that Kirk has a crew of Klingons, and they're battling in the halls of the Enterprise with weapons, like classic swords, because, you know, phasals, they would vaporize, and the creature couldn't continue resurrecting them.
Right. So it actually gives them all hand weapons in order to prolong their violence.
And there was that excellent scene of Scotty with the claymore.
Yeah.
And how happy he is in that one moment. And you know, the Klingons try everything. They try they do the old turn off the life support on the bridge, and ultimately there was a final confrontation in the engineering room where Kang and Kirk start laughing together at the creature.
That's right. And
that's how they defeat the day, is through laughter. Like, it's this great original series. But even you know, that one's a rather obscure one from season 3. Like, most people don't really go into season 3. That's a great episode. Trouble of Tribbles is the most watched episode of Star Trek.
Sure.
To the public, by and large. It's one of those things that's got Klingons, it has tribbles. You can show it to any girlfriend at any point in the relationship, and it's sort of a fun romp.
Okay.
Even if they're like, I don't know about this Star Trek thing, everyone has fun with the episode. And Kirk blatantly trusts Koloth. Like, okay, I don't like you, but we both have a claim to the space station, and we both have a claim to shore leave rights. So we're gonna try working this out together. And even when there's the ball, it's not Kirk attacking the Klingons for the bigotry. He puts, he holds Scotty's feet to the fire, right?
Well, so when Kirk says, I'll never trust Klingons, like, let them die, right? That's his sort of line, right? When we find out that the Klingons are dying, and he's like, let them die.
Yeah.
Now I totally get that as a guy whose son was killed by Klingons.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I wanted was, we could have made the film stronger by acknowledging that I used to trust Klingons, and then this happened. You know what I mean? Like, work the arc of the character into the story.
Yeah.
So he can say, well, when I was young and ignorant, I believed that we could work together. And hey, remember that time we defeated a monster by laughing at it?
Yeah.
But now, after they killed my son, I'll never forgive them.
Mm-hmm.
And that would reflect some kind of arc for the character, Mm-hmm. And I guess somebody felt either they didn't know about Kirk's previous past, or they decided that it was too complicated for an audience to get, and so they just ignored it.
Yeah, I'm afraid this is a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, which is a shame, because normally the film seems to be willing to tackle nuance.
Yeah. Well, my bigger problem. Okay, if you want to give Captain Kirk the Archie Bunker character arc, right? I'm racist. Oh, these other people are racist, and they're doing horrible things. I don't agree with these horrible things. I'm not racist, or at least I can see past it and I can grow, right? So that's his character arc.
Sure.
If they had just given it to Captain Cork, that would have been one thing. But the racism spreads beyond the captain.
That's right.
And infects everyone in the show. So one of the deleted scenes, actually has Scotty of all people, who, you know, I tend to think of Scotty as this sort of giant, lovable teddy bear.
Yeah.
He slides down a pole after counting the torpedoes and goes, "I bet that Klingon bitch killed her father." Like, even he's getting a little racist. Yeah, Klingon bitch. And then Spock says, "No, Klingons don't have tail ducts, so it's impossible for them to actually cry." Like, so it's one of those deleted scenes from the. So basically, the middle act is cut to shreds because there's all these little bits.
Well, I remember the famous conversation from Nichelle Nichols about the "Look, guess who's coming to dinner" line.
Oh yeah.
Right now, this line is a reference to a famous film. Right? Sidney Poitier's, yeah. Is it Guess Who or Look Who? No,
it's Guess Who.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
Because they remade it recently with in the last 10 years. They remade it as just Guess Who.
Really?
Yeah, they did the race swap. So the character who was the boyfriend was white.
Oh.
But it was played as a comedy. It had Boney Mack in it and that Ashton Kutcher guy. So it was played as more of a comedy. But that discussion of race was still the underpinnings of.
Yeah, it's not a remake. It's a comedic sequel.
Yeah, something like that.
But the original, of course, you know, is Sidney Poitier
and Spencer Tracy.
And Spencer
in his last role.
Really? So you clearly know much more about. Okay, so tell me why. So you tell me about this line in Nichelle Nichols. Now, when I watched it this afternoon, Chekhov says it.
Yeah. So I haven't seen the movie recently. It's one of those movies that I watched and I can appreciate.
Oh, you're talking about the original. Look, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But Spencer Tracy, he has the Captain Kirk Star Trek 6 character arc, right? Right? So he starts off, and then he doesn't have to stop an assassination, but through the process of the movie, gains acceptance until he gets to a point. Now, this is the second time that director Nicholas Meyer I guess I should use past tense, had used Spencer Tracy as the motivating factor for William Shatner to play Captain Kirk as an old man. So when he did Wrath of Khan, let me try to backtrack so I can clarify that language. When he did Wrath of Khan, the reason, and we'll get to the discussion between those two films, the motion picture was lambasted because Captain Kirk is covered in so much age-defying makeup. It's hilarious.
Okay.
That even the film techniques of the day, everyone can see this is not the Captain Kirk coming away from the TV show. This is a decade later Captain Kirk.
Okay.
So they weren't addressing the age issue. And what's the thing that Nick Meyer does in Wrath of Khan, which is address Kirk's age. He has a birthday, so he's getting 1 year closer to the end.
Yeah.
He's older. He's a little bit more tired, and they show him reading glasses.
Yeah.
The way to sell that to William Shatner at that point in his career was Nicholas Meyer had to say, Captain Kirk is going to be Spencer Tracy. So we saw him as a young man in his prime, just like we saw Spencer Tracy as a young man in his prime doing action movies, and then gracefully age him.
I see.
So this time he just took that sort of subtext and he just made it the text of the film.
Really?
Yes, because it was Star Trek 6. He has basically the Spencer Tracy plot arc.
Yeah.
It's not beat by beat, but it's within that same vein.
And the line in the film is referring to is talking about race, about Poitier as a black man coming to a white family.
Yeah.
And so Nichols didn't want to say the line because it makes Uhura a racist.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess so they gave it to Koenig instead, and he was willing to do it.
I think it's a matter of you know how in Watchmen, Alan Moore has to cite the Outer Limits episode that he's ripping off.
Sure.
So I think it's like that. It's one of those things where you sort of have to cite your source.
We're showing our work that we're referring to that film,
and we're being intentional about it.
We're gonna name the film
so
that you can kind of see what so that you know that we know that you know.
Yeah. So if you're a film buff and you know these things and you're like, wait, this feels familiar, that's where we're going. The other line that Nichelle Nichols was originally given was after the Klingons had left the dining room scene.
Yes.
After the Klingons departed, she then exhaustively says, "Would you let your daughter marry one of them?" Which, along with the "Guess Who's Coming to Dinner" line, really makes a horror racist.
Yeah, and what your point, I totally see. Like there's a scene in the film, the Klingons all leave by transporter, and then like all the bridge crew is standing there, and they all like kind of relax, and they all kind of get all of their racism out.
Yeah,
that they've been supposedly holding in for the last 2 hours. Like did you see the way that they ate, and they're such barbarians and
terrible table manners.
Yeah, exactly.
I do love Colt's line about, "Let me know if there's any other way we can screw up this evening."
Yeah.
That's one of the go-to lines, and I have a bad night, and I'm heading to bed. That's my exit line all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just such a great line.
So your argument is that if they had just made Kirk the racist, there wasn't a need to make everybody in the bridge crew so violently anti-Klingon. Can I just say a couple of other things about this film? It really bugs me that Uhura cannot speak Klingon. You remember when they have to pull up the dictionaries and there's that sort of comedy scene where she has to bluff the satellite staff,
and then Scotty's reading all the translation.
Yeah, and
that sequence is painful.
Yeah, because I mean, aren't these people supposed to be really good at their job? And then, on a similar note, the idea that McCoy does not know a thing about Klingon anatomy.
Yeah, both of them I find offensive on the level of competency.
Yeah,
like you can still have McCoy. You can still put McCoy in that same position. You don't have to take anything away from his character.
Right.
To say Gorkon is dying, McCoy gives it his best.
Yes.
And the patient still dies. Like Star Trek's done that story. Star Trek can continue to do that story.
That's right.
And it's a great doctoral story.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's the one time in these movies that we can see McCoy doing doctoral work. Like he really doesn't do much. Like he puts a little, like in terms of that we can relate to as human beings living in the 20th century, right? He's straddling the patient's bleeding out, he's going into cardiac arrest, and he's thumping on his chest.
Yes, which is film speak for the doctor's trying to save this guy's life.
Yeah, and you don't need to establish that one line of dialogue doesn't need to be said of, "I don't know anything about his anatomy, Jim."
Yeah.
You can still even have the drinking thing as being an issue. Like that was one of those things, because Valeris is the one who brings up the drinking, right? Like there's some Romulan ale on board. So it's the conspirator putting them down on their guard to take advantage of mistakes.
Yeah.
So you can still have all of that subplot of do your handshake and you were inebriated, and all of that can still happen within the confines of the film without making McCoy look less than.
Now,
the horror scene makes her look less than.
Yeah.
Because her one job is communications, it's outreach, it's talking to people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just find it hard to believe that somebody who's been a communications officer for almost 30 years wouldn't know. I don't know. I mean, I get that it was a comedy scene and they decided to play it for laughs, and I realized that reality bends in a comedy scene. I just kind of didn't want Nichelle Nichols to get punched.
But those two types of comedy scenes in Star Trek movies, right? The banter sequence that you have.
Yes.
And then the comedy sequence where you're making fun of the character.
Yeah.
And
Shit like the back of my hand.
yeah, exactly. That's the best example of one of those. I'm gonna make fun of the character to inject the needed humor here in this situation.
Yeah.
So we haven't had a laugh. We're dealing with some heavy stuff. What's the easiest way to get to that point? And we're gonna have Nichelle Nichols look,
yeah,
like she's not incompetent.
Incompetent. Yeah, right. Okay, so.
All right, so that was your first pet peeve, was the competency level of the supporting character.
Yeah, so like everyone who's listening is probably thinking, well, wow, all you're doing is like being nitpicky and picking on all the problems of this movie. But I guess that's what I'm doing, yes. And then, so there's another thing that bugs me. Okay. All right. So at the end of the film, Uhura says, as they're trying to find a way to stop the invisible bird of prey, hey, what about all that equipment we have to spot gas anomalies?
Yes.
But the Enterprise wasn't the one that had the equipment to catch gas anomalies. That was Sulu's ship. And Sulu says at the beginning, like it's in the very first scene of the film,
it's one of the false lines. It's Captain's log, you know.
We just spent the last 3 years cataloging gas anomalies in the Beta Quadrant. So my question is, oh, you who know the production history of this film, was it originally that Sulu's ship was going to make the torpedo, and the Sulu ship would fire the torpedo, or was that the original version, or was it always going to be the Enterprise, and like somehow they were going to be having the same mission that Sulu ended up having?
So in terms of so let's talk production, and then we'll talk fiction timeline.
Okay.
So production-wise, the Star Trek VI opened drastically different. There was no Sulu, there was no Excelsior, there was no gaseous anomalies.
Oh.
What it was in the opening of the movie, it would have been everyone of them are retired, and Kirk has to get the band together.
Oh, really?
So Sulu would have been driving a taxi in a Coruscant-like city planet, and Uhura would have been in the Midwest doing a radio show.
This was a original script?
Yeah, this was one of the very first drafts of the movie.
Okay.
Once a film is, and even if the director was involved in the writing process, once it's done, it goes to producers and bean counters who said this scene would be way too costly. Just have them show up in uniform. This is just too much money that we can afford. So Miles' opening is gone, just like in Star Trek II. Miles, the director's bit is gone. So what he does is he then creates the Captain Sulu idea.
What was?
I
know that we're probably say this for later, but what was Nicholas Meyer's bit at the beginning of Star Trek II? It got cut.
That was a misspeaking. So the Genesis, the Kobayashi Maru scenario wasn't supposed to be the initial opening.
Okay.
I know he had something else planned, but I didn't do the thorough research.
Well, okay, we'll save it for next time. All right, go back to 6.
So let's go back to 6.
Yeah, all right, back to 6. So that was the original ending. The ending gets cut. They redo and they do the Captain Sulu sequence.
Yeah, and so the Captain Sulu scenes get added into the mix, and it gives George Takei something to do finally.
Yeah, I like Takei in this film. He was great.
Oh yeah, he's one of the few people who aren't racist.
Yeah, right.
Right. He doesn't have that. He's got an alien on his bridge crew that looks like a human being if you ripped off all the skin and made a point on his head. That's how unracist he is. Like, he has this creature on the ship, which is legitimately horrifying. Like, if that was a horror movie villain, I would buy it. Like, I would buy into this idea.
Right.
So Sulu is removed from the main thrust of the movie, but he's allowed a few scenes to shine, and mostly he is also not racist.
Hold on a second. My dog just ate my shoe.
We have a shoe down. This is awesome radio. Oh no, I think this is why I have to fill in time.
Well, there's nothing to be done about it now. All right, back.
So to get to your point of the torpedo,
yeah,
which I could have probably once I realized that's how we got to the Captain Sulu thing, I could have stretched and filled out all that air. To get to the point of the torpedo, I don't know if that was supposed to, like if there's no Excelsior Captain Sulu subplot.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was anything like it could have just been we were doing it beforehand, or the last crew was doing it beforehand, and we just have the equipment. I think it gets to one of those bits where it's lazy writing. Yeah. The consistency of the Excelsior thing, it's obvious that it was tacked on sort of late in the game, because there was also beginning like. I made a post about this on Facebook. You know, I was picking my nits. Yeah. Because I love the Captain Sulu stuff. Like the Captain Sulu, if the new TV show is just Captain Sulu, George Takei on the bridge of the Excelsior by himself doing a one-man show, I am in. Right. I am so in. But those just like sloppy writing choices. So we're introduced to Valeris, not the traitor Savick.
Yeah.
We're introduced to her because the Enterprise has lost their helmsman. Now, we as Star Trek fans who've seen the 5 previous movies and the 3 previous seasons and the animated TV show know that the helmsman of the Enterprise is Sulu.
Right.
So our assumption is, oh, she's replacing Sulu. As a casual moviegoer, like if we're just a casual fan, like, oh, she's replacing Sulu.
3 years.
But he's been doing it for 3 years. And McCoy has that line of, where's Sulu? And Colt says, Captain Sulu, on assignment. Like he has to feel the need to correct Bones, as if Bones is just like, oh, I was just expecting to see my friend hail. Like, it's just really weird writing.
Well, that line suggests that Sulu just got the assignment. Mm-hmm. Like, if Bones expects to see Sulu there, then he must have seen him recently.
Yeah. It was, again, these all, like you said, these are nitpicks. These are little things that we can, but as Star Trek fans, you know, we obsess about these little nuances. Now, in terms of the overall production of the movie,
yeah,
I think the musical score is great because
the effects are pretty good too. I mean, having just watched 5, the effects are, you know, what's that?
They're phenomenal because they're done by ILM.
Right.
And the effects for Star Trek 5 were not.
Right.
And we'll get to why they were not when we get to 5. In terms of production value, I think 6 is solid. I think the writing, for the most part, is fairly consistent with the message they want to deliver. I just don't necessarily agree with what that message is.
Yeah.
And it gets to the idea of, in Nicholas Miles's book, The View from the Bridge. Like, I love these behind-the-scene books.
Yeah, totally.
Not because I'm interested in gossip, but I'm interested in process of creative people that I respect and admire.
Yep.
He said that the whole thrust of the movie came from Leonard Nimoy when he asked, who am I if I have no enemy to define me?
Okay.
That's a fine premise for a Star Trek film. Yeah. It's just the way they go about it is they decide to take the racism route of it. And we can't talk about this movie and not talk about Brock Peters.
Talk about who?
Brock Peters. He plays Admiral Cartwright.
Oh, yes. Okay.
The reason why I feel the need to bring him up is he's in To Kill a Mockingbird. He is Tom Robinson.
Wow.
Much younger in his career. He's Tom Robinson in this movie that's sort of heralded for talking about race issues.
Yeah.
So handily. And this movie, I feel, is just not as well done as that film in terms of discussing this issue.
Well, he's the leader of the anti-Klingon plot, right?
And the reason for that is because the reason why Nick Meyer decided to go with that route is because he's black, and that will shock the audience. He says so later in his book that speech was carefully constructed for the character, mainly because he's black and we've seen him before. So we see Cartwright in Star Trek IV, the one with the whales, as we all like to call it.
Yeah, okay.
We see him briefly in that movie. So
Right.
those are prior association with this character.
I'd forgotten that he was in that film.
I do think Star Trek VI does a wonderful job of incorporating continuity without stopping the movie.
Okay.
I think if Saavik had been Valeris,
Yeah.
as we all know it should be, and it's very difficult to separate the two because she's not given enough of a character on her own to define herself beyond Saavik, control F replace in the script, right? She's not given enough new material.
Yeah, in many ways, the character makes more sense if it's Saavik than if it's Valeris.
But in the deleted scene I mentioned, after they plot the demise of the Klingon Empire, and the president says no, these men will stand trial.
Yeah.
The admiral in the scene stops right before he leaves the redressed tinfoiled set. That is Paris, France.
Yeah.
And he goes, Kirk saved this planet twice, a reference to the motion picture in Voyage Home.
Right.
And the president's response is, and he'll do so again by standing trial. And that is the little tagline that gets us to the trial scene.
I see.
Well, people are shouting, "Kirk, Kirk, Kirk," and hitting the pain sticks on the floor. The president is an alien race that's not named in the movie, but we see that as a helmsman in Star Trek IV.
That's right.
On the Saratoga. So I think there's a lot of nice little nuanced touches in the film that does a better job than Star Trek V of wrapping up the franchise in terms of acknowledging the history. I think they're just tone deaf when it comes to Kirk. And I actually really do like your approach of, okay, we can keep this plot thread, but we have to acknowledge who this man was and how devastating the loss was. Because Star Trek doesn't deal with loss well.
Tell me what you mean.
If we approach it from like any other fiction, right? A main character dies in your show or in your comic book, you do the epilogue issue, right? You do the issue where everyone, after all the trauma is done, everyone's sort of standing around like, what do we do? How do we remember? Like,
You do the funeral for a friend.
a full friend, right? Or in the X-Men case, it's every other issue where someone's died and we have to stop everything and comment, right? About how we feel and how we met.
Oh, Scott, all I ever did was die on you.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly. Exactly. That was like the best moment that Morrison gave us.
I love that line.
So you have the opportunity to comment on the human condition of losing someone and what that makes us feel, because the dead person doesn't care; they're dead.
The moment that I remember from the Star Trek films of this is the last bits of 2.
Mm-hmm.
When Kirk is looking out on the Genesis planet and Carol asks him, "How do you feel?" and he says, "I feel young."
Yeah.
That's the reflection on the loss of a dear one, right?
Yeah. So after that, we got Mopey, Kirk, and Star Trek 3, which makes complete sense. Like, I understand, he had this moment of, I feel young, I feel hopeful, we have a new planet to explore, we have possibilities,
Sure.
Endless possibilities, something Spock was trying to tell me.
Yeah.
And then, the next day you wake up and your best friend's fucking dead. Right? So you woke yourself up to being okay, and then you realize, oh, this just happened yesterday, and I'm moping about it. The classic example is the rich Schultz always die. Well, in the humanist perspective, rich Schultz are people too.
Yeah.
So you rarely get the Peter David wrote a great Star Trek comic where Kirk had to write to the parents of a rich Schultz that died, and he couldn't remember the kid's name.
Right.
And he's going around trying to piece together who this person was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just sort of this wonderful human element. Now, in terms of what happens with David, David's death is the thrust of Star Trek 6.
Right.
So if we're to buy into the logic, I've never trusted Klingons, I'll never forgive them for the death of my son. If we're to buy into that theme, then that addresses the impact that David's death had on Cole. Because all we see is he stumbles in the captain's chair, which is a beautiful moment of acting on William Shatner's part.
In 3?
In 3. And then he continues on because he has to, right? He has to save the day.
And then we get the angry, you Klingon bastard, you killed my son.
Yeah.
And
but even in 3, okay, and we have to bring this up because I know that's not a Star Trek 3 podcast. And thinking about it in retrospect, we probably should have made it that.
We'll do 3 and 4 later.
Even when Cole, Christopher Lloyd, is trying to kill Cole,
yeah,
he offers his hand.
That's true.
To save him.
Yeah.
He does the Trek thing, like the die-hard thing is kick him down and have a one-liner, but the Star Trek thing is to offer your hand, and Cole tries to kill him for this act of human kindness.
Yes. Right.
And this is the man actually responsible for David's death.
So yeah, right. So like I teach lit. I teach literature, and every semester I teach A Good Man Is Hard to Find, Flannery O'Connor's.
That's a great one.
Short story. And you remember the end of this story where Granny is there on her knees in front of the misfit. And the misfit has just had her entire family shot, led out into the woods and shot. And he's explaining why he is the way he is, that he's tortured by his uncertainty over Christ's existence or not. And Granny kind of has this moment of grace where she reaches out to him. She like physically reaches out to him, and she says, "Well, you're like one of my babies. She recognizes him as a man in pain, and she attempts to soothe his pain." Now we're back in Star Trek V territory.
Yeah,
but she tries to attempt an emotional contact with him. The woman whose entire family has just been massacred, who has the least of all possible reasons to feel empathy and sympathy for this man, does. She feels empathy for him, and he is so threatened by that empathy that he shoots her 3 times in the chest. Right. So that's kind of what we see at the end of 3, when Kirk tries to save Christopher Lloyd's character, and the Klingon
it tries to drag him down into the fire.
Drag him down. So it's a pretty tough leap from that Kirk, the Kirk who is willing to save the man who killed his son
less than an hour ago.
Yes, to the guy who says, "I've never trusted Klingons. They killed my son."
It's really because we never get to see it. Like we get to see Kirk mourning Spock. We don't get to see Kirk mourning David.
Yeah, he has that picture on his desk.
Yeah, and he didn't have the picture on his desk in any of the other films.
Yeah, that picture has to carry a whole lot of dramatic weight.
Yeah, and it's a good thing that the actor was good looking. So if he was an ugly guy, it'd be harder to swallow that your main lead is a racist because of him. Because that's all he has to emote through is this black and white photograph.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, so final thoughts on 6 before we move on. I mean, I enjoyed the film, despite my reservations. But every time I watch it, I'm going to imagine Kirstie Alley instead of Kim Cattrall. I'm sorry.
It's
one day we'll get enough visual effects that somebody will do that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like they'll just read. They'll. In fact, you could probably do it now if somebody was willing to brave PBS Paramount's fan film guidelines, and just re-edit the film and put Kirstie Alley in there. But
so to bring the discussion back to the Entertainment Weekly article.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Which I read and I quite enjoyed. In fact, it made me reappreciate a napkin scene.
Yeah.
And the long shot that goes into it, because every time I saw that scene, as I said, I read the process books, so I've read William Shatner's countless autobiographies, and he comments on when he talks about the scene, all he's focusing is on the food, because normally in acting scenes you don't eat the food, you prepare the food, right. You show people messing with the food on the plate, and you show the plate has a little less food for continuity reasons.
Right.
But Nicholas Mayo had bet anyone $100 for every take that they ate the blue food. Wow. Why food had to be blue, whatever. And Shatner sitting there chowing down. So when I watch that scene, I always think of just Shatner just like, I'm going to get that money. I'm going to get that money. He talks about how horrible the blue dye was on the food.
Right.
But the Entertainment Weekly article put a lot of attention to when he casually, dismissively opens his napkin and makes these comments that William Shatner has a majesty in this film that he doesn't have in the other films. The central thesis of, as you alluded to in the beginning, is it falls apart when it becomes a franchise product.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can see his point. I understand where the argument can be made. And that's because while this is airing in 91, Star Trek The Next Generation is in its fifth season.
Right.
Thereabouts.
Yeah.
Probably third or fourth. No. Yeah, fourth or fifth. Like in between there. So we're getting regular dose of Star Trek.
Yeah.
On a weekly basis. And we'll get to Next Generation's impact on Star Trek V in a moment.
Okay.
But on that bridge is Worf, and he's a Klingon, and we know Worf, and Worf's in this movie, for fuck's sake. I mean, he's even named that. Worf, who's going to have a son named Mo, who's going to have a son named Worf, right? So that lineage is acknowledged. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to move the discussion of how do you get it to the point where in Next Generation you have Worf on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Yeah, there's some world building going on
here. Yeah, there was world building going on. And I think Star Trek V does it so much better.
Okay, so let's talk about V, because the fact that you think V does anything good probably puts you in a minority camp on this movie.
I'm so the minority camp.
Now, I just watched this film yesterday, and I remember, I don't know if I've ever seen it since it first came out. Like, I watched it when it first came out. I thought that it was pretty mediocre. I have seen it, I think, at least one other time on television or something, on cable. And the effects are bad. And
the effects are abominable.
And but as I rewatched it, for one thing, it has some of the most memorable lines in the entire franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everybody remembers, why does God need a starship? Like, everybody remembers that line, right?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
That's the best part. He raises his hand. Like, excuse me.
Like he wants to get called on. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's got a bunch of memorable lines. Like Captain, not in front of the Klingons, right? Like when Kirkus goes to hug Spock at the end. There was another line from 6 that I forgot to mention, which is when Bones looks up and says, "What is it with you anyway?" When they're in the prison, on the prison planet, and the sexy alien has already hit on Kirk, right? But there are moments in 5, but they're pretty few and far between, and they're almost all comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so the history of this film is fairly well known.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Shatner kind of really wanted to do one of these after Nimoy had done 2. but the budget was cut, kind of progressively cut.
Mhm.
And his original intention for the ending, which was this kind of massive special effects extravaganza with angels and demons, and then that got demoted to rock monsters, and then the rock monster suit didn't work.
Got demoted to one rock monster. Rock monster suit didn't work.
And everything just kind of collapsed. And you get this, you still have a special effects ending, but it's kind of obviously done on the cheap, with the sort of floating godhead shooting lightning bolts out of its eyes, right? Well, anyway, so most people lump this in the odd movies suck bucket. I would love to hear your
Oh, I remember we were driving. I think it was like the last day you were in Riverside, and we were driving around town packing up boxes, and I had made this comment that I really kind of love Star Trek V, and mind-boggled, like the one with God. And those, I understand. Like, I'm not going to say 5 is a great film. I'm not going to say that.
I actually got. I kind of liked Cybok by the end, which is weird.
Mhm.
I kind of liked Cybok, and I kind of regret that he died. Like, I kind of would have liked to have seen Cybok be a part of the mythos.
Yeah. Well, there's a new timeline, and we don't know which Vulcan survived.
Well, that's true. Did anybody ever do like a young Cybok story, like stories before Cybok died?
Cybok is usually okay. So let's get to a couple things.
Okay.
So I want to backtrack a little bit.
Yeah, you'll have to.
Cybok is a whole discussion.
Okay.
So when it comes to the production of the movie, yeah, the budgetary scale back thing is well known. At the very beginning of the production sequence of this film,
I read the novel to this book. I remember reading it. It's like one of the very few Star Trek books I've ever read.
Mhm.
Go on.
The novels are actually kind of great because of those is like this running Carol Marcus subplot.
Yeah.
That Kirk and Carol Marcus are a thing in J.M. Dillard's books. And she really emphasizes that they are in a relationship throughout the whole, even in Generations. Like she has a cameo in Generations. I kind of love it for that. Because Carol Marcus never gets mentioned again.
Yeah.
After 2. And
Which is dumb. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Especially considering you're playing with an older Kirk.
Well, you set up Carol Marcus as basically the love of his life, and you don't do that and then ignore it.
So we have to go back to the 70s to discuss the beginning of Star Trek V, at least from Gene Roddenberry's perspective.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So originally, Star Trek was going to be brought back to television in the 70s, right? That's sort of well known.
Yeah.
Star Trek Phase 2 is what it was called. It was going to launch the United Paramount Network 3 decades before it finally did in the mid-90s.
And this is where Decker and Troy and a bunch of other
Decker and why am I blanking on the name?
Yeah.
Ilea show up.
Yeah, the Delta.
And a Vulcan named Zahn, who would have been the science officer, but he would have been completely, and we'll talk about Zahn in a bit, when we get to the motion picture discussion.
Okay.
Because I also kind of love the motion picture. The original script for that TV show was called like In Thine Image. And the concept of it was the Enterprise crew go off to find God and find nothing. They find a entity on the throne of lies. They were going to confront the Christian deity God, and it would not have been true. And during the production, Roddenberry recounts the story of telling William Shatner about this.
Okay.
And William Shatner has no recollection of this. But the Roddenberry camp swear up and down that Shatner basically just stole his idea.
I see.
Because at this point in the films, Roddenberry has no input whatsoever. He's creative consultant. They show him the movie, and that's about it.
Nothing, yeah. Titles like that mean nothing.
Yeah, it's like Stan Lee, executive producer. Yeah, no one's going to Stan Lee to say, which Captain America shield are we going to use in the scene?
Right.
No, Stan Lee is there to collect a paycheck for a cameo, and he's fun.
Yeah.
So he was sort of regulated to that, but Roddenberry was obviously frustrated because he still wants to be in the thick of things. So when it came to the Roddenberry camp, that William Shatner, who had a, what was it called? He had like a favored nations clause with Leonard Nimoy. So when they signed up for Star Trek 4, the agreement was that Nimoy would get, if Nimoy got it, Shatner got it. And if Shatner got it, Nimoy got it.
Okay.
And that was the favored nations clause. So when Nimoy directs Star Trek 4 and it does really well, the Paramount suits go, okay, we'll give it to you. Now, at this point, Shatner's doing a whole bunch of documentaries. He's doing all those sort of National Geographic discussion, like filming in strange locations.
Okay.
And the only TV he's getting is like televangelist stuff.
Yes, I read this. Yeah.
Because televangelists were the only one communicating to what we, at that point in time, were calling the developing world, the third world.
Right.
Because they were trying to reach people for God. Right. And Shatner had a lot of complicated emotions. So he tried to channel that to do what Star Trek does. And this is one of the reasons why I love 5, is Star Trek is taking something that's socially happening in the world at this moment in time and trying to address it.
Yeah.
So if we take the opening scene of Cybok as this other, as a superpower, in the metaphor of the opening scene where he comes riding in on a horse to a developing guy who's digging holes in the mud and says, I have a better way for you, that is what the metaphor of that sequence is. And that's what
he's a missionary.
Yeah, and he's a missionary.
Yeah.
Shatner also wants to do the Divine Comedy.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so when you talk about angels and demons, it was literally going to be at a certain point in this film, he would have been Dante going through hell.
Okay.
Like, Spock and McCoy would have betrayed him to Cybok, and it would have left Kirk alone, because, again, it's William Shatner. So it would have left Kirk alone, and Kirk would have had to, through sheer force of will, drag himself out of hell and save his crew.
I see.
And that was the thrust of it. And Nimoy and DeForest Kelly saw this and said, fucking, we're not betraying Kirk.
Right.
Like, no. Not happening. Like, all characters are not going to do that. Go rewrite your movie.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's where we start getting the initial scaling back, is the objection from, in terms of also budget, but the rejection by the main principal actors of not doing this film on the basis that their character wouldn't do it.
I see. Even with Cybok's sort of mind control powers or whatever it is that he's really doing. I mean, his mind meld thing is never really explained, right? Because he makes the whole bridge, he makes most of the bridge crew act in very uncharacteristic ways.
And it's unfortunate that we don't see, like, what is Chekhov's main pain? Like, is Chekhov's main pain being used as a pawn to kill his former captain by Khan? Like, is that the thing that he's guilty of? Is it like, because when we do get to see it, it's the best thing in the movie. And I would say the scene with Cybok is probably the single best scene in all of the original movies.
Are you thinking of the McCoy?
The McCoy, the Spock, the Kirk, I need my pain.
Yeah.
From beginning to end, that scene is wonderfully written and works so well within the context of a franchise picture.
Yeah.
Because it re-examines each character individually without being subtractive.
Right.
Like, in the way that, we were commenting on the comedy bit. Like, it's not a comedy moment.
Yeah.
This is the serious heart of the movie. And we get to examine the different pains of each character in turn. And I wrote about this at length on my face. I think it's a public post, so anyone who wants to read about it.
No, they're here to listen to it now.
Oh, okay. Oh, let me pull up that.
But the scene with McCoy and his father has got to be the most demanding scene for Bones in the original films, with the possible exception of when he's carrying Spock's soul in 3, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, with possibly rivaled only by that scene. I mean, this is the time when DeForest Kelly gets to really act.
Yeah, it's his best moment. I mean, I love it from the acting of it is just spot on. With Bones. Bones is always sort of slow and considered.
Yeah.
Like he can be impulsive. But when he's interacting with Culk, what he's there is to slow Culk down so that Culk can re-examine his options.
Right.
Right. So there's that wonderful scene in Balance of Terror where Culk goes down to his cabin to wrestle with his issues, and Bones shows up and goes, "I'm going to give you a speech." And he gives him a speech about the math and probabilities of all the number of planets with the number of life forms and the number of stars that we know. And it comes down to this moment of don't kill the one named Culk, right? So he goes off and he physically actually stops William Shatner from leaving the room.
Oh.
So the fact that the scene is so long with this dying man in this room, and it's slow, and the camera is so methodical, like that intentionally puts you in McCoy's headspace.
Right.
My favorite bit in that is the catchphrase of McCoy takes on more weight in retrospect. I'm a doctor, not a blah. I'm a doctor, not a moon. I'm in moon shuttle conductor. I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer.
Bricklayer, that's my favorite.
That is his go-to phrase. I'm a doctor, not a insult job title here.
Nightlight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the scene, Cyborg walks around him and offhandedly comments, "You're a doctor."
Yeah.
And his response is this painful, heartbreaking, "I'm his son."
Right. Not a doctor.
So, in other words, I'm his son, not a doctor in this scene. So when he does euthanize his father, when he assists in that process, he's not doing it as a doctor and a healer stopping pain. He's doing it as a heartbroken son who is saving his father's dignity.
Right.
Because I don't believe, like, I have this whole headcanon as to what's going on in this scene because I've just been so fixated on it for years and years. It's like the best thing. It's one of the better scenes in any of the Star Trek.
I remember it's important to the fiction story you wrote.
Oh yeah, it was heart and center, but I didn't want to steal the moment from 5.
Yeah.
So I wanted to address it without stealing from the scene and being detractive in continuity.
Okay, so setting aside that scene, why should we not hate the rest of 5?
Okay, so I think I've done a good job showing up that scene. Just really briefly, the Spock, he's so human, calls back to Star Trek 2.
Yeah.
When Savick says, "Culk isn't what I suspected he'd be," and Spock is like, "What was that?" He's so human. And Spock has the laugh line of, "No one's perfect."
No one's perfect, Savick.
So it calls back that scene in a very sort of Grace Note way.
Yeah.
That's why Culk and Spock get along so well, is because of this shared sort of, from a Vulcan's perspective, they're both so human.
Right.
Because you don't get more Vulcan than Celica Vulcan in the original universe, I guess we'll call it, the main timeline. And then you have Culk's, whole articles. I'm sure someone's written a book on, I need my pain.
Yeah, right.
And it's such a great line because it changes with time. Like, people's perspectives of that scene change with the passage of time. Like, if you're a teenager, that line is so empowering to get you through whatever troubles you have.
Right.
Because it's such a defiant statement, and it's so beautifully flawed. Because Culk's not going to be a man who heals.
Okay.
Because he has that perspective of, I need my pain. So he's not going to go beyond that point. So he's arrested his development in terms of addressing this.
For some reason, it reminds me of that episode of when Kirk is split into 2 people.
Yes.
And the one that's aggressive and violent is necessary to the one that's pacifistic and weak.
But the one who can overcome fear was the weak one.
Right.
It was the compassionate side.
Yeah.
So moving aside from that scene, because I feel like if we're going to talk about it, we have to at least mention the big highlight.
Yeah, sure.
Star Trek V, of all the movies, it's so fucking Star Trek. Can I cuss on this podcast?
Yeah, it is, with the quest for God and the Great Barrier, and
it is such a grab bag of Star Trek goodness that I can forgive a lot. So, okay, putting aside the fact that the movie has no real production company for the special effects,
right?
Because they were doing Last Crusade, like they were doing Last Crusade, and I think Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah,
that's what ILM's attention was. No, why would I? Okay. So putting aside the fact that from a production point of view, ILM is stretched too thin, they've got 2 giant movies that they all focused on. William Shatner's Star Trek movie is going to have to wait.
Sure.
From that point of view, it's very Star Trek in terms of the bad special effects. Go into the characters.
You're saying that the bad special effects actually make it more Star Trek.
It does. At least from my perspective. The original series, the special effects was they would get one shot of the Enterprise and they would copy and paste it 4 times to show you 4 different ships.
Yeah.
But the stars would travel at the same distance on each shot the same way, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm specifically referring to the Ultimate Computer episode when the Enterprise had to fight off 4 of those ships.
Right.
So moving aside the fact that the special effects are crude, when you have a plot that is ludicrous. I mean, you have essentially Vulcan Jesus showing up, healing people. Like that's really his crime, is healing people. Like he doesn't do a mind meld proper, and we're not exactly sure what he's doing. Like you said, his powers are amorphous.
Yeah.
It's obvious that he's beyond a touch telepath.
Right.
Because that seems to be the limitation of Vulcan mental powers, is they at least have to touch something.
Yeah. Sometimes
it's just a wall and they can read your mind through it.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the inconsistencies of the original show.
Yeah.
You have the camp scene, and that it's totally a camp scene in every sense of the word.
Right.
Like Colt climbing a mountain. Why is he climbing the mountain? It was that great YouTube clip of someone smashing that interview that William Shatner gave about making love to a mountain, and they did one of those song remixes. That's totally entertaining. Like totally kill like 2 minutes of your life.
Okay.
Because it's so weird. But so you have Colt climbing this mountain, making this ascent. And at this point, Cork is metaphor for all of mankind.
Okay.
Cork is literally climbing from the earth, reaching up. So
I presume, I guess I took it from a character side, and I was thinking, well, this is a guy who can't stop looking for thrills.
Yeah.
Right. Like no matter what, even when he doesn't have a ship to command, he's still got a thrill seek.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, okay. But on the plane of the symbol,
yeah,
sure.
Like he's like, how many? I can think of 3 or 4 different biblical stories of a dude climbing a mountain.
Well, and there's for the world is hollow and I've touched the sky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those that aspect of it, like it's Coke as metaphor for mankind reaching towards something, and that's going to be the main thrust of what the movie is, right? They're trying to reach to something that is unreachable, right? They're trying to discover God,
right?
So you have that metaphor walking. You got that excellent piece of soundtrack music that just not Star Trek, but it's very calming, very hopeful. You have Spock and Rocket Boots, which Spock and Rocket Boots, excellent combination.
The special effects are so bad, I found it hard to get behind the rocket.
I know, it totally is. And the best part is like those photos of him being like strapped to this crane and the crane's bobbing up and down. and that's how you get the up and down. Like, it's hilarious. So you have that bit. You've got McCoy, and then you have all three of them. Like, the next scene is them around the campfire.
Yeah.
And it's them having, you know, they'll back and forth. And it's Colt's thought of, you know, I always knew I'll die alone.
Yeah.
Sort of foreshadowing what could happen at the end of the movie. There's
a lot of that, three of them around the campfire scene. Like, that's so, there's two of those scenes, of course. There's the beginning part, and then they come back to it at the end. But
those are the callback scene.
Yeah, but I was surprised how long that sequence lasts. And the cynical part of me was thinking, oh, well, that's so they can fill out the movie without using a lot of money, right? Like, but you know, you and I, we're gamers, and one of the biggest challenges of a role-playing game, getting a role-playing game to happen, is to get the characters in a room and have them just talk to each other without a plot. Like, they almost never do that. It's really hard to get the characters talking about something or about anything. They're always waiting for the GM to kind of give them the next plot, and then they sort of problem solve, right?
Yeah, from a gaming perspective, I think it's because no one wants to waste each other's time.
Yeah, probably.
But from a game mastering perspective, that's exactly why we do this. Is to get
like those moments where the characters are just sitting in a room talking to each other are characterization gold mines, right? Yeah. We need to
come up with a whole bunch of stuff. Like, that's why grading is great to role play with. Like,
well, yeah. So now we've gone off into the weeds, but we need to find a game system that encourages those kinds of character interaction moments. And the Star Trek role playing game system is not one of them.
No, it's not.
Right?
It's all problem solving.
And it's all very mechanical. Like, those of you that have played the Star Trek RPG in any of its various incarnations, I'm from the old FACID days, but then I also played the newer version. Who was the publisher on that one?
We played The Last Unicorn, which wasn't the newest. It's the in between FASFA and the current publisher, whose products I haven't touched.
Well, it really should be like, I don't know, like, we should find a game system that encourages characters to have conversations when there's no in scenes between plot. I don't know what sequence, what games.
Isn't that Robin Laws's Hillfolk?
Yep, the drama system, I think.
Drama system. Thank you. I couldn't think of it.
Drama system. Of course, that has almost no kind of conflict, no action. Yeah. It's not designed to do action at all. So Star Trek, I don't know, action in Star Trek films has often been kind of problematic, though.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you compare it to things like the action in other sci-fi movies, and Star Trek often seems to come off as kind of emotionless and without gravity.
I think the problem is action is antithetical in the Star Trek universe, right?
Is it? I mean, Kirk has always been an action hero.
Yeah, but we have more episodes with Picard, right?
300 Quatloos on the Alien. I mean, those
the fisticuffs, right? Those the fisticuffs of it. But ultimately, Kirk solves all the big dilemmas not through punching or fighting. He solves them by speechifying.
Now that's true. You're right. I mean, the physical stuff that Kirk does
leads up to
the dramatic resolution. You're right. Yeah.
So basically, he has to beat you down long enough that you'll stop doing what you're doing and listen to him. And he's got great ideas. But Picard takes that to a whole nother field. Like, it's shocking when Picard throws a punch.
Well, but now we're in the Kelvin verse, right? Where
it's all action all the time.
It's all action all the time. Exactly.
It's wall action.
Fast and the Furious in space.
So getting back to trying to get us back to the conversation.
Back to 5.
Back to 5. The characterization in the scenes with the Trinity is fantastic.
Yeah.
The characterization of the other crew members.
So let's talk about the Uhura Scotty thing.
Okay.
Okay. Because like at the first time that we see Scotty and Uhura at the beginning of the episode, and once again we have yet another film in which the Enterprise is barely functioning.
Yeah.
I got so tired of those. Like, Jesus, can't you give us one where the ship is working?
Mm-hmm.
But then we got that pretty much in 6, so that was nice to see. But the first thing that we see is Scotty working, and Uhura's like, we were supposed to have shore leave together. And she brings food, and he's like, oh, like, you're so thoughtful and considerate. And then, an hour later, after Cybok is like done whatever it is Cybok does, he's given the old Vulcan love touch to Uhura, and she starts hitting on Scotty like pretty heavy. And he's like, basically he decides not to take advantage of her. Did this ever get followed up, or was there any pre-grounding for this? Did we invent? Is there a relationship between Uhura and Scotty in the canon?
In canon, canon is just this gets back. To get back to the Roddenberry discussion, just for a second, I'm going to come back right to this. Just put a pin in it. Roddenberry claimed that 5 and 6 are apocryphal and don't exist in canon. So canon's a fluid concept. The accepted canon by most fans is if it's a TV show, it exists, except for the animated series.
I think almost all fans would say that 5 and 6 are part of the canon.
Yes. 5, yeah, that's just one of those things I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, Roddenberry might not think that they're in the canon.
Yeah. For the sake of full disclosure, I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, okay.
And now that I'm thinking about it, Star Trek 6 was happening when season 5 was happening because Spock shows up there in Unification Part 1 and 2.
Yep.
Which is a sequel to The Undiscovered Country.
Right.
So that was part of the 25-year anniversary.
Right.
So I'm super glad I don't have to turn in my note card on that one. It just took me an hour to get to that point. Getting to the idea of Scotty and Uhura, it shows up in this movie and it quietly goes away after this movie.
Okay.
So it's one of those, they kind of had to give them scenes. It's one of the, I think it could have been interesting, like had they decided to explore it and say, hey, this is just a working couple relationship.
Sure.
Like, because we don't know what the parameters of it. It seems like Uhura wants to take it to a romantic level, and Sky is like, no.
Right.
I can't do this in my condition and not yours.
Yeah, that's why I say it seems like he sort of realized that she's not in her right mind.
Yeah. So
yeah, I
don't know what the dynamic is. It's one of those things I kind of have to, it's very difficult to get your head around because it shows up out of nowhere and goes away.
There are parts of 5 which are painful to watch. And one of those moments is the fan dance scene.
I can't defend it. I like the song. Okay. I like the soundtrack. I don't know why, but for some reason, I put it with like. I remember making a compilation tape when I was a kid, back when we had those cassette tapes.
Yeah, I remember that. Sure.
It had the Star Trek 5 song, and it had like Bananarama, right? Cool song. Like,
let it go on the record that James Seals has no shame. Like he will reveal everything about himself to the public. Banana.
I will defend Karate Kid to my dying breath. And that's why I hold that song. And usually my musical taste is I hold it in a movie once.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
And I'm like, oh, I like this song. This has a nice emotional impact on me. So there's no defending the fan dance. I'm not
the three-breasted, stripper pole and pole, and so many of like. There's just so many awful moments in this movie.
There is, but there was actually a book out there. I just learned about it, and someone took a sort of an academic perspective of sex in the original series.
Okay.
Well, they break down. I haven't read. I just saw an advertisement for it today.
Okay.
It's on my Amazon wish list.
Sure. Yeah. There you go. If you're looking to buy Jim a Christmas present, now you know.
There you go. So I'm really curious to see where he falls under this. But my perspective is sex in Star Trek. It's there. We all know it's there. I mean, Captain Kirk's there.
Yeah.
it's not always appropriately there.
Yeah.
And these two instances in 5 is it's not appropriately in there because the cat lady adds nothing.
Right.
Like the fan dance scene, you could have written it any number of ways. You didn't have to write it that they're horny, they're not going to pay attention while the men sneak off.
Well,
and capture.
Yeah, and her, like, sort of demeaning.
Yeah, becoming a sex symbol.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's awkward and it's painful, and I don't, those are the things I'm like, okay, I can have this on the background and file paperwork and go to the restroom.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Because I've seen it, I've seen them enough times, and I know how long it takes.
What about what else do we need to talk about 5?
Well, with 5, so we spoke about the Trinity, and those was the camp scene, the sequence at the end. I think we need to now get to Sybok.
Okay, let's talk about Sybok.
So did you know that they wanted Sean Connery to be Sybok?
In my extensive research for this podcast, which consisted of me reading the Wikipedia entry, the Sean Connery bit was mentioned. Okay. That's why the planet is called Shaka-Ree, because it was a joke about Sean Connery's name.
Yeah. I kind of wonder what that would have looked like.
Sean Connery is Sybok? Yeah,
because...
But the actor that played Sybok did not do anything wrong.
No, he does a great performance. What I'm thinking of is, would we get Sean Connery, would we get the Sean Connery cool cat, or would we get Sean Connery from Avengers?
Right.
Like, what Sean Connery is going to show up for this Star Trek film. And that's just one of those, like, I would love it to be Saavik in Star Trek 6. Part of me, as the James Bond fan, would love to see those two great tastes together and see what would happen. Because it could be a colossal train wreck.
The funny thing is about Sybok, the reason why I say that I start to like him is because of the end. Like, Sybok kind of realizes he's been had. And, of course, that's because the God entity kind of tells you, yo, you've been had. There's not a lot of deduction that goes on there. It's just kind of all revealed by the God thing at the end. But once he figures out that he has been played for a sucker, he resolves to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And to help the others escape by using his singularly unique powers to apparently only distract the God being. It doesn't appear to stop him for long or destroy him. And that's why, maybe Sybok lives or something. I don't know. But you know what it kind of reminded me of? Especially because at that moment, Sybok, the God entity, has taken on Sybok's face. Right? Sybok the God entity has sort of said, let me show you my favorite face. And it's Sybok's own body.
Mocking him.
Yeah, exactly. And that reminded me of, I think it's a late season 3 episode with a guy named Lazarus.
That is, you're talking about A Taste of Armageddon.
Where
that is in season 1.
Say again?
That is in season 1.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Where there's 2 guys and they're like the same person, but in like alternate universes, and they're connected by some kind of tunnel.
And they get locked in, and they physically do the same thing. And again, this is one of those things that, as a Star Trek fan, I love 5, because it's just a grab bag of awesome Star Trek bits. Like A Taste of Armageddon. I don't know if you've gone back and you.
I haven't. No.
It's not A Taste of Armageddon. What is it called? No, it's called the Alternate Factor.
Okay. See, everybody out there was like correcting you. They were all shouting at the screen.
Yeah. Let me double check this really quick, because I know I'm gonna have to eat crow on this if I keep saying this anymore. Yes, it's the Alternate Factor.
Okay.
A Taste of Armageddon is a better episode.
Which one is Taste of Armageddon?
That's the one where the computer is deciding who dies in this giant war.
Okay.
And the Enterprise is part of the casualty list.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
It's a wonderful episode of how people can get comfortable with war.
Yeah.
And sort of like a commentary on the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Yeah. But this is the
alternate factor is Lazarus, and it's ends with the quote of, "But what of Lazarus? What of Lazarus?"
And Lazarus is the guy, he like volunteers to basically go into the tunnel forever.
Yeah. Trapped in this bale hug with himself.
Yeah. And that's
Cyborg does. Cyborg does the Technicolor bale hug to himself at the end of this film.
Yeah.
So there's all these like nice little subtle touches to the original series that I quite enjoy. You know, the comedy is inconsistent, but the comedy in any Trek thing is inconsistent. Like, I find the Sulu Chekhov scene endearing. Like, we can't find a thing. I find that hilarious. Your mileage may vary, and I think that really sort of sums up my take on Star Trek V. Is mileage will vary, and a lot of people will focus on the film's problems,
okay,
and not focus on some of its merits. And I agree with you that Cyborg, by the end of that movie, every time we get to the point where this is my fault, this is my vanity,
yeah,
that has brought us here, that has endangered my brother's life,
yeah,
which we haven't even discussed the brother concept.
Yeah, right. So, because I asked kind of, has anybody else done anything with Cyborg? And you were like, okay, well, we got to go like way back to the 70s.
Yeah, so to answer your question, with Cyborg hasn't been touched much. The idea that Spock comes out of the blue and says he has a brother, yeah, I think was a pill. That was the conceit to fall for this film. Like, fine, we can go along with Scotty and Uhura being like, wife and husband. Like, okay, sure, let's go with this idea. But the idea that Spock is keeping this secret and no one has mentioned it in 22 years, 23 years of the franchise's history, that is the bridge too far. Personally, from my perspective, I don't think it's that big of a deal, because the original series, and again, this is sort of my shield, like going back to the original series, Kirk mentions a brother in one episode, and we see that brother, played by William Shatner with a mustache, dead on the floor.
You're
the next episode. Yeah, no, not kidding you. He's basically, they go off and they're like, oh, this colony that my brother lives on is in trouble. We have to go investigate. And it's just William Shatner in one of the jumpsuits from the Horda episode, Devil in the Dark. And he's lying on the floor, and they turn his head, and it's clearly William Shatner with his hair messed up and a mustache, a fake mustache. And that was Sam Kirk. So,
wow.
The idea that all of a sudden it gets to the idea that Star Trek's a space opera, right? It's very operatic. And part of that is opera, which is introducing elements randomly for your story. Like,
yeah, those of us that read comics, I mean, it's a retcon. Like, we're all so used to the retcon.
Mm-hmm. So for me, it's not the deal breaker, but for a lot of fans, it is.
I see. And
Cyborg is controversial in that he's Spock's half brother that no one's mentioned. There was no reason to mention it, and I don't think people quite understand the Vulcan emotion concept. I think Star Trek fans get it, but I think the general audience public, Vulcan means they don't have emotions.
As opposed to Vulcan meaning that they have to control their emotions.
Yeah, they have powerful emotions, and if they let it go, bad things happen. Right. Like, the reason Vulcans don't lie is not because they can't lie, because we see that happening all the time. The reason they do it, they don't lie as a cultural standard, is because lying is illogical. It delays the truth from coming out. The truth will come out, and the logical fallacy that's in place is the fact that now you have to deal with the fact that you lied.
Right.
So you have to deal with that sort of unintended, the blowback, the unintended consequence of your action in delaying something that would inevitably come out.
Gotcha.
And whenever Spock lies, it's usually to protect something or to delay long enough to get to the resolution, right? So that's the Star Trek 6 bit of a lie, a mistake, an omission, a choice.
Which is a callback to the second episode, to Star Trek 2, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. An exaggeration.
Mm-hmm. So, what's his name? Lawrence Littenby, the actor who played Cyborg, got the part because he played Lyndon B. Johnson in something that Shatner saw.
Oh, really?
And he said, "Oh my God, this is the guy." And I think, like you said, he becomes very sympathetic at the end of the.
Yeah, he sells it. I do think he sells the part.
But the idea that the starship can fly to the center of the galaxy is fucking preposterous. And I'm not. It is. It's with the way Star Trek is set up. Its rules for faster than light travel. It's silly.
Okay.
But like I said, those enough of the film that I like. The character work that is solid for me. The people sitting around talking about nothing. That for me, I can totally buy the film and I'll pop it in and watch it pretty regularly compared to the other.
You know what's interesting to me, because a lot of my exposure to Star Trek has been from Star Trek Online, a big MMO, and both 5 and 6 are very well represented in Star Trek Online. Nimbus 3 is an adventure planet in Star Trek Online, which has hours of questing on it. And you can walk around like the sets and everything, and there's this whole kind of Romulan plot line going on, and a bunch of other little kind of stuff going on all over, and you can walk around it's very faithful in its recreation, and also got lots of story packed into it. And Rura Penthe from Star Trek 6 is also a big adventure location, and there's a bunch of references to the film and characters and objects and things, everything from dilithium mining to all kinds of stuff that you see.
Oh my goodness, I randomly bring this up since you mentioned Rura Penthe in representation in other media. Rura Penthe shows up again in Star Trek Enterprise.
Okay. Oh, the prequel series.
The prequel series. So the unfortunate part about the first 2 seasons of Enterprise is they steal from every other show and give it to Ultra first. Yeah. So Ultra doesn't get to do the Captain, Scott Bakula's character, doesn't get to do things new. He's just doing retreads, and it's stepping on, like, he meets the Ferengi Force. Well, we know that Picard meets the Ferengi Force, and that sort of decides his character, like, he lost a ship because of it. So Ultra does escape from Rura Penthe. He gets sent to the prison planet, and like Malcolm Reed, like it's nothing. He's sent to like this ice cave set. Like they do the trial set on a TV budget. So if you can imagine it, green screen with a TV budget.
Yeah.
It's pretty sad because they actually do try to recreate shots from the film.
Oh, really?
Of the trial scene.
Okay.
And then he's on the ice set they use for the Andorian planet, just redressed. Oh, and Malcolm Reed shows up and goes, "Okay, we're getting you out. We have this teleporter transponder." They use the Star Trek Nemesis trick of the lapel pin that can beam you out to get Ultra out of this planet that we're told no one ever escapes from.
Right.
Except if you're Scott Bakula.
Yeah, right. Then it's childishly simple.
Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure. I can look it up, but I don't think Cyborg has been used much, at least in the other media that I've seen.
I'm sure to most fans, they're probably glad for that. I was just curious.
Yeah, I like the character. I think he has potential. I think the idea of you blowing up Vulcan in a movie and not dealing with it in subsequent movies is preposterous.
Well, it's a huge missed opportunity, right? I mean, you have, like, we should totally see Spock's brother. I would totally dig to see that character, especially.
Well, Spock is still engaged to T'Pol. Amok Time. He still has, that woman is still existing. Like, if she survived the planet, you now have a Spock or T'Pol romance where Spock is torn between being in love, like his father established in the first film,
right,
and doing what he needs to do for his people, because they've essentially become a wandering nation.
Right.
Was it more disparate people?
Yeah.
They have no home planet, and I just don't think they'll addressing it because they want to do con and blow up shit.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a little bit cerebral. I mean, for the Abrams verse, right? Which is kind of all about fast spaceships and big guns.
Yeah.
And having Carol Marcus take off her clothes in front of everybody.
Oh God, that seems so bad.
But another time,
Yes, that's another episode. Okay.
We will blow holes in the Abrams verse another time. Well, any parting thoughts or comments about 5 or 6 or any of our other things we talked about? Like, okay, if anybody has any advice for like the perfect game system for Star Trek, Chris McLaughlin, you are out there. I don't know if you were listening, but you ran a very long Star Trek campaign, I know. So what game system would you use? If anybody else has any advice, I would love to hear it. Which film should we do next? Should we go back and do 1 and 2? Or do we want to save Wrath of Khan? Because, you know, we all acknowledge it's basically the best of the Star Trek films, at least in my. Yes.
What I kind of want to do is I kind of want to do Nemesis and Insurrection.
Oh, okay, because I like to remember nothing of those. Okay, so what numbers are they?
That's 9 and 10.
9 and 10. Okay, so looks like maybe we'll do those next. If anybody has any things that they think that we should say, like questions or comments or opinions about those films, Nemesis and Insurrection, then post in the comments. And is that it? Shall we wrap up?
Commenting on game systems.
Sure.
I know there was someone out there on my Facebook feed who was doing I'm scraping off all of the names.
Yeah.
Doing a conversion of the Icon superpowered system.
Okay.
To capture the flavor of the animated series.
There is an Icons in Space setting that's being developed. I don't remember the name of it. If Mike Lafferty was here, he could tell us. But I will figure out who that is. And my also thought is maybe next time we might invite a third person to
that'd be nice.
Chat about some of this with us. So maybe I can get Professor McLaughlin, who I know is a devoted Star Trek fan, or one of our other big Star Trek watchers would like to join us, and you'll have somebody else to listen to besides my dopey questions. Everybody, thank you very much for listening, and we will let you go. This has been the BAMF podcast, and I'm your host, Jason Tondro, and our guest is Jim Seals.
Hello. Oh, goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.